So my experience initially at Big Apple was it was really intimidating, because you go in there and you don't really know what you're doing, as most people who don't buy records. Maybe now it's different because you can kind of go in and do a bit of crate digging, but in Big Apple, the crates were kind of like behind you, and then but the majority of the new stuff was behind John and Hatcher and whoever, like Jack, whoever's working in the shop that day. So you kind of had to look and ask what it was. If you knew what you were going in there to get, you'd just be like, I want Agent X, I want Sticky, I want Zinc, and they'll kind of put a pile together for you, and then they'll either kind of just play it in the house system for you to go like yes or no. Then as you got to know them a little bit better, they might send you upstairs with like a cartridge, and then upstairs there was like a little room that had about 8 kind of listening booths in it, and you could sit there, put the needle on with your pile of records, go through it in the headphones, come downstairs and pay for the ones that you want and give back the ones you didn't. But then there was another level up from that. Once you like really got comfortable with them, there was like a little room where they'd let you smoke in there. I wasn't a smoker, but people would sit in there smoking for hours. You could go up there, you had like speakers in there, you'd sit on a couch similar to this and just put the records on and sit in there and have a listen of them properly. So like when you got that, you felt like you were kind of like a preferred customer. You were like part of the family, so that was special for anyone that got given that key. You knew you had like been accepted into the family, so to speak. But yeah, I think before I got to that, I remember my first experience walking into Big Apple. I was with my mate from college, and this was about the same time that I started, like it was before I bought my first set of decks, but it was coming up to that time. And we walked in there and we just went to walk straight upstairs. We sort of looked around, we're like, and John's gone, where are you going? And we were like, upstairs. And he went, well, you're going to need some records first. We didn't know it was up there. We thought there'd be more records or whatever. So he come downstairs, and my mate's like trying not to laugh because we were like school kids that got caught like trying to sneak out or something. And then he's gone, what do you want to listen to? And I was like, oh, just like garage, like new, whatever you've got. And he kind of picked a few records off, and then he just started playing them in the shop. And my mate's there trying not, he's like, we're getting mugged off here. Like, we thought we were going to get a pile of records to go upstairs, and John had other ideas. So I think it was probably a few months after that of going to like Swag Records in West Croydon, where it was a little bit more, everyone was kind of like, all of the listening booths were kind of embedded in the sort of front desk, so you didn't have that kind of upstairs downstairs. It was pretty obvious where you go to listen. They didn't have quite as many exclusives when it came to like the garage stuff as Apple though, so I knew I had to get back there once I kind of knew what I was doing. So yeah, I probably spent a month or 2 in Swag, plucked the courage back up to go into Apple, and then after that, yeah, I was more become a bit of part of the furniture there. I had a job in a bar, a full-time job. My first full-time job was in a bar in Croydon, and we used to do double shifts on Fridays and Saturdays. So on any given Friday, Saturday, I'd have a 2-hour lunch break, and I'd go to Apple and spend 2 hours there, just kind of hanging out. And that's how I ended up meeting a lot of the other Croydon like producers and DJs.
So you didn't know many of them before Big Apple?
I kind of knew some of the people that were in there before. Like, we had weird kind of connections to people. Croydon's like, as big as it is a town, it's got like quite a close-knit community where we're all linked. So like Mala, for example, Mala was an MC, as was Koki. They were MCs on the garage circuit, so I kind of knew of them as MCs. But I also played football with Mala's twin brothers, Dean and Darren, when I was growing up. So I knew his brothers. I didn't know Scream or Benga or N-Type or Walsh. I met N-Type in the shop, I think, when I came in to sort of... I knew Hatcher, actually. I went to school with Hatcher. Hatcher was in the year above me at school. So we went to the same school together, as did Easy Rider. He was in the same year as Hatcher. But yeah, the rest of them I kind of met either like in and around the record shop, or later on, we kind of like... I went to college with Loafer. So I met Loafer in college before I knew him as Loafer. He was like even a year above me, so we were both doing like art at A level. And yeah, so I knew of him. I think Pokes might have gone to the same college as well, but I didn't meet him until a bit later on. But yeah, I mean, like, my mum worked with Mala at Vodafone. Like, that was another weird connection. But so yeah, there's all these like weird little connections. But in terms of actually really knowing them, I'd say that when I first started shopping in Big Apple, apart from Hatcher, who I knew from school, he recognised me when I went in the shop. I didn't know many of the others.
Musically, what did Big Apple mean to you in like your development?
I think musically for me, it was that meeting the DJs who were on the radio, and I was so desperate to, like, I really wanted to get on the radio. Once I knew I could mix, I was like, I knew I was good enough to get on the radio, but I just didn't really know how. My friend Abel, he kind of opened a few doors. We were doing internet radio together, UK Garage FM, I think it was called, and we used to broadcast through like Shoutcast on his computer. So we didn't actually need to leave his house to broadcast on that, and people used to kind of like dial in from wherever they were DJing. They had a slot, you dialed in, did your slot, and then hung up basically. And he got me on 2G FM, so that was my first pirate. But I knew that I wanted to step up from that, because I could tell, even though I hadn't really had much experience of being anywhere else, I think Hatcher took me and Benny Hill and a few people to Flight FM one night. So I'd seen that and saw how much busier like the phone line was, and I was like, wow, this is way better than what my radio stations have been like up to this point. So I aspired to do better. So being in Big Apple and being around people who were on those stations and meeting them and making those connections felt really important. It was like, you want to meet these people, do a bit of networking with them, and then it's like, there's only so much you can kind of offer yourself as a DJ. They're like, oh, there's everyone who comes in the shop's a DJ, but not everyone's a producer. And it became apparent to me that, seeing how people like Scream and I guess even Benga to a certain extent. I didn't see Benga as much in the shop as I saw Scream. Scream would come in the shop and kind of play like a mini disc or CD of stuff he'd been working on, and Hatcher would be like critiquing it, and then some of it would end up on his show. He'd go and cut a dub plate, and that was fascinating to me. I was like, well, that's how maybe I need to start making beats, but I couldn't get my head around it for a long time, just trying to figure it out myself, making pretty bad beats out of like samples ripped off of like Super Mario and stuff like that. But I didn't really like have any joy with Hatcher in that respect with my early stuff. But that was it. It was like Big Apple was the door. It was like you're at the doorstep. Like you've got their ear now. Like, what do you want? And what I wanted was, I want to be on the radio. What do I need to do? And there was only so much, like they can do for a DJ. But if you've got some kind of, that's where I realised, like, I need people to hear me. I need to maybe make beats or whatever. And I was struggling for a while until like the grime sound kind of kicked in. Tunes like Pulse X. When I heard that, I was like, I could probably make something like that. But obviously, it was a strange art to like perfect that 8-bar sound without making it sound too cheap. Which, like Pulse X was the most simple track ever, but it did bang. It's like, how can I make something that hits like that? Then maybe I'll get my foot in the door. And that was it. It took me a little while to like get my foot in the door. And it's funny because initially it wasn't even Hatcher, but like N-Type in the shop was like, did you make this? And I was like, yeah. And he said, oh, take my number, can I get a CD? And Hatcher I was like, oh, you can have that one. Like he's not interested in those beats. So, and he went to the radio that day. So I remember meeting him that day and driving home to sit in my house, because he was going to be on Delight FM about 3 hours later. So I was literally sat there and he played like 2 of my tracks on the radio. And it's mad, like even to this day, that is one of the most vivid memories of my whole career. Like hearing your music on the radio for the first time it sticks with you. And that was N-Type. So yeah, big up him. And then eventually it was obviously getting those bits to Slimzy, which I had to post to him, to the Rhythm Division shop. And yeah, once Slimzy started playing it, then Hatcher was like, oh, give me some exclusives and that. But yeah, Slimzy and N-Type were the first two, and then I think like closely followed by Hatcher after that.
So what was you producing? Was it Fruity Loops?
Yeah, so producing predominantly would have been Fruity Loops 2.0 and then like 3.56 for a long time. The difference between those two versions was Fruity Loops 2.0 had a plugin on it called the TS404, which is, well, if you hear the old classic Scream and Benga early Big Apple productions, that wobbly bass line, that was written in the TS404, and it only worked and sounded like that in FL 2.0. When it moved to FL 3.56, if you opened any of those old project files, the TS404 sounded completely different, and it was used differently as well. So yeah, anything that sounded a bit like that, like if you listen to, in terms of my catalogue, Pump Up the Jam and a track called Camel Ride, those two were produced in the TS404 on FL2. You can tell just from the sound of the bass. But a lot of the rest of my stuff was probably like 3.56 onwards. I actually went back to 2 to do that when I figured out how to use the 404 from sitting in, collaborating with Scream and seeing how he used it. And I was like, I had no idea that was how you manipulated that synth. So I went back, having like probably had a couple of releases at this point, and that's when I was like, right, I want to make, now I can try and make something that sounds a bit more like the dubs. It wasn't called dubstep then, it was still, we didn't know what it was, but it didn't feel like garage. Artwork was like, this isn't garage, you're making something else, but it's good, keep at it. And yeah, I wanted to make some stuff that sounded a bit more like what Scream and Benga were doing, and the TS404 allowed me to like get that kind of bass sound that I couldn't do without it. So yeah, I went back in time to do Pump Up the Jam and Camel Ride with that.
Did you ever use Music 2000 or anything like that?
Only for fun. I had it on my PlayStation, but I can't say I ever bounced anything out of it. My only memories of that were how cheesy like the like reggae vocal samples on it were. I remember laughing at them a lot. But Benga was your guy for that. He was really pretty decent at it.
There's a few rumours about what's been made on PlayStations over the years. But
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure of any that definitely were, but if anyone could make one, it was Benga. I'd definitely seen him. I went to his house and he fired it up, and I was amazed at some of the saves on his memory card. I was like, yeah, it blew me away what he managed to get out of it. It still wasn't quite as good as the stuff he was making on FL, but it was surprisingly good, because I just couldn't believe anyone could get anything decent out of it. I think a magazine asked me a few years ago, like, they were like, oh, if we get a copy of that, could you make a tune? And I was like, no, I couldn't even imagine. I think it'd just be more frustrating than decent, to be honest, if I had a go at that.
So how did you get onto Rinse?
Rinse was, it was like a long, I was wanting to get onto Rinse for a long time. From when I started listening to Slimzy like religiously, I was like, and then he started playing my music, I was like, right, this is my time to try and get on this station now. And I remember driving round East London. I had a job in record distribution, so when I started my own label, that was pretty much off the back of the stuff I learnt in that job. So I knew where all the shops were, and I knew the route. So I used to press my own records, borrow my mum's car. She had a bigger car than me, the old Ford Focus. I used to pack all the records into it and do the route. So when I get to like East London, I do like Rhythm Division, Pull for Music in Bow, and then I go into Central London, do like Uptown, Black Market, Release the Groove, all them shops there. So, but in them areas, I could actually pick Rinse up in the car. So I used to listen to it a lot while I was like delivering my records. And I remember hearing a DJ on there, and I don't want to say his name because he's a mate of mine now, but his mixing was atrocious. So I'm like, this guy's like clanging the place up, but he had a tune out, and I was like, he's on the radio because people know of that tune. He's got a big tune out at the minute, and everyone's playing it. And I thought, like, that's how I need to get on Rinse. And like, this was obviously before I'd really established myself. So yeah, I guess driving around them times, I was probably not distributing my own records. That would have been other people's when I heard that, because it was before I started producing. So just to kind of like re-jog my memory, upon hearing that, that was the realisation that if I want to get on that station, I need to get some tunes out. I've been making beats at this point, but nothing that good. And then I think once Slimzy started playing my music, I was really hot on like, right, who do I speak to? Who do I get a tape to? So when I went to Rhythm Division and did start like delivering music, I was speaking to Sparky in there, and I said like, how do people get on Rinse? Like, what's the process like? And he went, you need to speak to like Slimzy about it. And I think at the time Logan Sama was a bit like the in-between sort of Slimzy. He was kind of dealing with Slimzy's inbox, if you like. He would kind of collect the promos for him and deliver them to him. So Logan was the one that told me, you need to speak to someone called Doug's, and just do a tape. It's like, do a tape like you were on the radio. Do a mix. So I did a mix, gave it to Logan, and he gave it to Doug's. And I got a call from Doug's, and he's like, oh, you know, your mixing's really good and that. We haven't really got anything going at the minute though, but like, you know, we'll be in touch if anything comes available. Gave me like a nice phone call, but kind of let me down, but didn't just leave it, you know. But then a few months down the line, I met Mark 1 and Oris J, and they obviously had quite a few releases out under the belt. Oris J was like, as far as I was concerned, he was massive. Like, I was well aware of him. I'd been playing his music on the radio for probably a year or two at this point. So I was actually like, he was probably the first person I met where I was like, oh my god, this is someone whose records I play. Because we didn't know what anyone looked like back then. We didn't have MySpace. We didn't have magazines reporting on what we were doing. So I had no idea what he looked like. But Mark sent me some music, and this is how I got to know them. I was writing reviews for Rewind magazine under the guise of Plastic Man, even though I was still DJing as Darkstar these days. That was like a moniker that I used to like secretly review people's vinyl in Rewind mag. So Mark sent me a CD of like an upcoming release he had, and I sent him an email back saying, your music sounds a bit like Oris J, I like it. And he was like, oh, that's my flatmate. And I was like, oh wow, like, have you got any more beats? Like, I'm doing radio now and I'd love some like dubs. I was eager. Anyone had any unreleased music for me, I was like, that's what I wanted. So I got to know Mark through like sending me music, and I was really into everything he sent. And then met Oris through Mark, trying to get them a distribution deal at the company I was working for. And yeah, we became good mates. And then I think Genius said to Oris J, do you want to do a show on Rinse? And he was like, we could probably do a show on Rinse, but they were travelling down from like Sheffield and Manchester. So Mark said, do you want to do it with us? And I was like, yeah, of course. Like, so I used to travel up to Rinse to do the Virus Syndicate show, which was initially, I think, like 1 till 3 in the morning on a Saturday night. So we go up there, the boys would come down from Manchester. I think Oris came a couple of times, but not often. And then we do the show. And then I think after a few months, there was a time where they couldn't get down, and Mark was like, do you want to just cover it? And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to miss radio. So I went up and did it on my own, and I think at the time we were on after Boys in the Hood. So I'd go in there, it was like, we used to have to crawl into the studio back then. It was like sawdust everywhere, like a double sort of cladded box built inside like a room in the back of a flat in the classic 3 flats in Bow. That was the first studio I went to. So I'm climbing into the studio with my like record bag and that, and I'm in there on my own. And yeah, so when you've not got an MC, I felt like I got to say something on the radio, and no one's going to text in. And back then, that's all you wanted as a DJ. You wanted a bit of interaction from that phone line. That was the buzz. Like, oh, people are actually listening to me. You know, it's a bit different to just doing a mix in your bedroom. And yeah, talking about the tunes I was playing, but still playing like mostly instrumental grime, I guess, and bits of the early dubstep that I was able to source from Scream and Benga mostly, and then like Cyrus Random Trio and a few people there that maybe some of the producers I've met at Forward around that time as well, early days. So Search and Destroy, Quiet Storms, who we now know as Casper. Yeah, I play a bit of that, whatever I could get my hands on. Chase and Status even, actually, was some of the early stuff I played. Their early productions, which were like breakbeat garage really. And Genius heard me on the radio, and he called me the next day and was like, we need a show like what you did last night. He said, no one talks about the beats that they're playing. It's like, we've just got MCs spitting over it, but no one talks about the beats. He's like, do you want a show of your own? He's like, you can still do the other one. And I was like, yeah, 100%. And he gave me like 7 till 9 on a Saturday, which was amazing slot. This kind of coincided around the time that there was like a MC ban on the station. So a lot of the crews kind of got like sidelined, but that opened a massive door for me to come in and do almost like a grime set but with no MCs. So it meant that I was one of the only people on the station, I guess, that was even playing grime at that time because of that. Because everyone came on with MCs apart from me. And Logan used to do an hour. He used to do an hour of garage and an hour of grime back then. So that was it. I think that it opened the door, and right place, right time, just kind of ran with it. And that kind of coincided, I guess, a similar time of like when people started to record the radio shows and they ended up on Bear Files, and then like Get Darker, and all these places started popping up where they'd archive people's shows. So if people weren't locked in live, they could actually download it in the week, and then you'd start seeing tens of thousands of people listening to your radio show, and that was like massive. And I just think that I was in such a good spot at that point to like capitalize on the perfect storm of all that happening. It just opened me up to not just people who caught Rinse in the locality, but people who were listening online and stuff in the week.
So I'm guessing through Rinse, that's how you went into Forward.
Yes, I did Rinse first, and then, so at the time, I think the only other DJs that were associated with Forward that were on Rinse, there was a Forward show, and that used to be, most of the time, Code 9 would do that. So I think Code 9 was the only other DJ on Rinse at that point in time. And then I think like shortly after that, Hatcher and Crazy D got a show, and then N-Type a little bit further down the line, and then Scream. But yeah, Forward, I think was June 2023, and I think I joined Rinse about March, so there's a few months. And then I think like Sarah Lockhart and Neil, I knew them before that because I was working in a distribution company, and they had a load of stock that they couldn't shift. They had a deal at the time with Essential Direct, which was another distributor who used to distribute all the early Temper, Horsepower, Shelf Life, all of the like Soldier, all of those labels that they used to look after under that umbrella at Ammunition Promotions, which also ran Forward. So I met Neil and Sarah before they'd heard me DJ. I was really enthusiastic about the music they were putting out, even though none of the record shops were. It was really hard to sell those early Temper records. The only shop that really wanted them was Uptown and Big Apple. But by the time we got them, I was working for a company called Street Sales. We were just basically getting all the stock that Essential had decided they couldn't sell. So then Neil and Sarah were like, see if you can sell some of that. And I was trying my best to sell it, but it was really difficult to. So I'd met them before that, but I don't think they were aware of me as a DJ or a producer. And through playing on Rinse, I think Neil, one of them, heard me and was like, oh, you work with Mark 1, we know Oris and blah blah, and like we'll book you for Forward. And I was like, oh, I've been going to Forward for a couple of years at this point, so I was like, yeah, I'd love to play Forward. So me and Mark played back to back the first time, June, July 2023, first 2 hours, so like literally to no one initially. And then, like even back then, the busy Forward was about 50 people. It weren't. People think, oh, Forward was like, it was packed. It weren't packed for years, It probably wasn't until around 2005 that it really started to get quite busy there. But yeah, I loved it, and I still have very vivid memories of playing that first set there. And yeah, that's how that came about. I think they heard me on Rinse and thought it sounded good enough, and then just added me into the roster. And then obviously I started working with Sarah, had a release on Soldier and a release on Road, which were her labels, under the Ammunition, all part of that. And that was it. They just became a huge part of introducing me to like the world, really, because Forward was the first real DJ booking that I had. I had bookings before that, but it was like more garage and kind of like just playing the sort of pirate radios, like nights that they put on, and you weren't getting paid, and probably like not many people there, and no one who cared who you were. But in there, it was all about the music you were playing, because no other club night played that music apart from there. And I think Forward was almost born out of, talking back to Big Apple again, Big Apple had a Christmas party, which I want to say was like 2001, I think it was, and we got invited to it. they gave sort of these passes out, and they had a little venue in Croydon, and they booked LB did like a live set in there, and they booked Heartless Crew, and Heartless Crew played Pulse X that night, and I was like, what's this? But that night changed a lot for me. But it also, Sarah was there, and she went to that night and was like, we should do this, we should. And that's how she started Forward. Like, she went there, from what I understand anyway, she was inspired by what she saw there to like book that kind of stuff into a regular club night, and that was it. Forward used to be obviously at Velvet Rooms back then, and then eventually moved to Plastic People, where that's where it really like established itself.
So would you play much grime at the time, or was that quite frowned upon?
It was frowned upon, but yeah, I did play a lot of grime, and I think back then we didn't have a great read on how it was going to go down until you really got in there and played it. The only thing we had was dubplate.net website, which had a forum on it, and I remember leading up to my first booking there was a topic on there about a set that Hatcher had played at the previous one, where people were moaning about the 8-bar he played, and I was there and I was like, weren't 8-bar to me. Like, what I know as 8-bar was literally like lo-fi, grime, dirty samples, really not particularly well produced. And I thought that when he played it was weighty. But yeah, I think they were referring to maybe like some of Benga's beats that were like 8-bar, but they were still heavy. But there was a big topic about Hatcher playing grime. Forward's not for this is kids' music, blah blah. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do there? And I think that inspired me a little bit to like push into my productions a bit more and be like, right, I make unapologetically pretty much 8-bar grime, but I'm trying to produce it a bit more, trying to structure it a bit more like these tracks that Hatcher's playing, the Scream tracks, like the Benga tracks. So I was structuring my stuff like kind of going in with that 8-bar mentality and sound, but trying to structure it more like a longer song. So like the minute-long intro, the drop, the breakdown, the second drop. Whereas most 8-bar tunes were literally just 8 bars, copy and paste for 4 minutes. No, nothing changed. It was just for the MCs to spit over. It didn't matter that it was boring, because it's not boring when an MC goes on top of it. So I tried to do that, and so yeah, I remember like reading those forums and being like, I need to get some music done, because Forward was all about having dubs. So you knew you had to come with some stuff that no one had heard either. So yeah, I spent probably a month in the studio, and back then I used to produce a lot, like way more than I do now, living at home with my mum. And yeah, in mum and dad's house, I'm just up all night making beats, made some music, played it there, made sure it was weighty, but it was still, to me, it was still more like grime than the dubstep stuff. So yeah, I definitely played a lot of grime, played vocal grime, but it went down well. I think like I was accepted. I don't know why, but I didn't get the flack. I didn't have anyone moaning on the forums about what I played. I was allowed to do it. I don't know, maybe because Hatcher had represented that sound, that tribal kind of sound that he was doing. So anything that deviated from that, maybe he got the flack. But when I came in, it's like, well, I've been booked because I make that. And they just had to get on accepting it. And actually went down really well, because I would mix that with dubstep. And I had access to all the dubs in Croydon, but I had access to all the dubs in East, because I knew all the Rinse lot, and I was on Slimsy's label, and I'd met, by this point probably met people like Skepta. I had dubs from Jammer and Footsie, and I could mix all of that in. So I was fortunate. I didn't really get any complaints. It just seemed to work. The first time I heard someone play one of my tunes at Forward, I remember again vividly, DJ Shorty was playing. He had a release on Locked On around that time. I think it was called Lawnmower. It was like almost like a grime version of a Dillinger record, and I saw one of my heroes in Forward, right, and I made a beeline for him. Back then everyone used to turn up Forward with like CDs of their music, and this guy I can see is holding a couple of CDs of his music, and I'm like, I want one of them CDs. So I've gone over and I'm like, hello mate, my name's Chris, like I DJ as Plastic Man, I make beats. And he's like, he don't know who I am. He's just standing there like, alright, cool. Basically the DJ, it was DJ Narrows, and I wanted some beats off of him. he was one of my favourite producers. And while I'm talking to him, I can tell he wants rid of me. So I was about to just leave him to it, and then DJ Shorty played one of my tracks. I think it was The Lift, if I remember rightly. It was either The Lift or Spring Roller. That got a quite a similar bass sound. I can't remember which of the two. I want to say The Lift. I'm 90% sure it was The Lift, if memory served me right. But when he played it, I was saying to Narrow, I was like, this is my tune. But I'd never heard my tune in Forward, so I was like equally excited that I'm hearing my tune in Forward, and I also thought I might actually get some dubs off of Narrows now if he likes this tune. And he's like, oh yeah, cool, this your tune, yeah? Like, kind of shook my hand and that. I didn't get a CD off of him, but he knew who I was. The next time I saw him, we was cool and we swapped CDs, and that was that. But after that, the next one I heard other people play my tune at Forward was Hatcher played Hard Graft, and he got a reload. And them times we used to get a stretch limo to Forward from Croydon. So it was like, I got in a stretch limo with a bunch of people I didn't know. Like, all the people I knew from Croydon were in there was 2 stretch limos, right? Hatcher's got all of his A-team in the front limo, and all of the rest of us got chucked in the second one. So I'm in there with a bunch of like the sort of like the new schoolers, if you like. I didn't know who any of them were. We were chatting all the way up there, and then he played my tune, and it got a reload. So all the boys that were in the like front limo were like, "Who made that?" And there's like, I was like, "Plastic Man made it. That's him over there." So then everyone's coming. He's like, "Oh, how do I get that tune off you? Can I get that tune off you?" I felt like royalty on the way home. Honestly, it was like my status went from second limo to first limo. In that moment, I probably could have got in the first limo home. But yeah, it was funny. It was almost like a hierarchy. But when you got your tunes actually played at Forward, that was like the acceptance. Like, you're in big school now when that happens, you know.
Just taking it back a bit, Slimzy put out your first release. How did that come about?
Literally me sending him a CD. I sent it in the post, old school, to Rhythm Division, and it had probably about 5 tracks on it. A track called Venom, which was the A-side, and then a few other bits that nothing came of really. But back then the family computer was in like the living room in the downstairs of the house, and I was making my beats on a version of Fruity that weren't even cracked, so I couldn't save anything. I used to have to make it, finish it, and then record it like audio onto a mini disc because I didn't know how to. I couldn't save it, so I used to stay up all night. And back then I didn't even know that I could record with the volume turned off. So I used to literally like have this system, and I would turn it up to full whack at like 3 a.m. I'd get my duvet and my pillows and be like sitting down there like that, like downstairs, recording this tune at full volume in my house. My parents are asleep upstairs, just so I could get it onto a mini disc and turn the computer off at the end of the night. And that's how I used to finish my tracks. And I sent the CD to Slim, and one of them was Venom. And a few weeks later, I'm sat at that same computer just messing about, and I had the Nokia 8210 with a red case on it, and it buzzed, and it was like, I like them tunes, it's Slimzy, save my number. And my heart, honestly, it was like, I think I stood up. I was shaking. I was like so excited, but I couldn't believe it. So I texted him back and I was like, "Oh, glad you like it." He's like, and then he said, "Can I have it exclusive?" And I said, "Yeah." And then a few weeks later, he texted me again saying, "Oh, I'm going to start a label. Have you got anything for the B-side?" And then I made Shockwave, and he played that on New Year's Eve Sidewinder tape pack before it come out, and obviously that was massive back then. Slimzy playing your tune on a tape pack, that was like, everyone's hearing that. Slimzy was like the tape that everyone wanted to listen to, and it was full of music that was unreleased every time he played there. So him playing that on there on the New Year's Eve, I think it was like either like the last tune before the midnight or the first tune after it, I can't remember what one, but it was right at like a moment. And I think he had Viper or B Live or someone on the set.
Slim and Pierre new dubs. It's called some wobbly. We love the wobblers, innit?
And yeah, that just set the tone for that release. It came out as Slim's Os 002. So I think the first one was the Heinz ED, which was like the controversial one.
Yeah, Bionics.
It was released as Bionics, but it was actually Heinz ED. So yeah, mine was like 002, and yeah, that was massive for me, having that release.
Wasn't it Rico? Didn't he diss someone over it?
I think you're right. Yeah, he did.
Was it Morfire?
Yeah, because I did some dubs for him around that time as well. I did like a bootleg version of like Ho and Morfire Oi that Slimzy played in the middle of like a lot of those.
Something like that,
yeah, and that was, I think someone bought that dub off of Slimzy recently. Someone was telling me they got that, but no one knew that was me. But I did make a dub or two for him in the heat of that clash, and I think Rico went over that, and I think he probably would have around that time. He was still playing like Venom and Shockwave a lot in those sets, so there's a solid chance. There's some good clips of it from that time.